What's up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On NBA, the biggest stories with the local experts. I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, also host of Locked On Rockets right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Today, we'll be chatting with Philip Rossman-Reich from Locked On Magic as the Orlando Magic select Paolo Banchero, shockingly, #1 overall in this year's NBA draft. What does getting a player of Paolo Banchero's caliber mean for this Orlando Magic franchise? Was he the right choice instead of going with who was the consensus #1 overall guy, Jabari Smith Jr., throughout what seems to be the entire pre-draft process? But first, a quick message from our friends over at rockauto.com, because with the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's basically impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts that you would need in a traditional chain storefront. You can save time and money when using rockauto.com. Why choose to spend 30, 50, even 100% more for the exact same parts from a chain store or car dealership? Best of all, rockauto.com is a family business. They've been serving do-it-yourselfers online for over 20 years. The prices are always reliably low for every single customer. They don't price gouge you just for being a DIY person, which is how it should be. You shouldn't have to pay more just because you know how to do some repairs on your vehicle. They've got everything you could possibly need, from brake parts, tail lamps, from motor oil, even brand new carpet. So go explore their easy-to-use website today to find the solutions to your auto parts needs. Go to rockauto.com right now to see all the parts available for your car or truck. And this is the really important part. When you go to checkout, be sure to write Locked On in their "How did you hear about us" box so that they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. Be sure to visit rockauto.com. Joining us now is Philip Rossman-Reich from Locked On Magic. You can follow on Twitter at PhilipRR_OM. Philip, if you would have told us, you and I respectively, a week ago that we'd be sitting here and you would be the one talking about Paolo Banchero going to your team, the Orlando Magic, at #1 overall, and I would be talking about Jabari Smith Jr. wearing Rockets red going #3 overall, we both probably would have looked together and said, yeah, you're crazy. And yet here we are, Paolo Banchero going #1 overall in this year's NBA draft, one of the most covert pre-draft processes ever if you're the Orlando Magic, and a crazy 24 hours leading up to the draft where we saw the winds of change swirling. We saw all the rumors that Paolo could go #1. I dug my heels in and said, nope, Banchero's still going to fall to 3 at the Rockets. You dug your heels in and said that Jabari was still the guy at #1. And here we are. Walk me through that crazy lead up to the draft and then the moment that Paolo was selected #1 overall.
Yeah, it was wild. I mean, as you kind of alluded to, if you would have told me the Magic ended up on draft night with Paolo Banchero and the Rockets ended up with Jabari Smith, I would have asked you how many draft picks did the Rockets send Orlando's way? Did we end up with Kenyon Martin Jr. in the process? It was a wild 24 hours, with even the betting lines changing the way that they change and how dramatically they seem to change. And I kept saying this really feels like a bunch of bettors just kind of saw that there was some value in Paolo Banchero, and then there was sort of a run on the bank, so to speak, where a lot of money was just coming on him. And I didn't really read much to it, and a lot of it was because of things that I was hearing and seeing here in Orlando. I was an NBA source told me that the Magic were scheduled to work out Paolo Banchero the Sunday before the draft. At some point during the week leading into that, and then all of a sudden that workout was canceled. And it just didn't feel like the Magic are going to be able to get him in. And it's not that the Magic haven't drafted guys who didn't work out for them before, but especially having the #1 pick, having so much control, being able to pick who they want to get, a guy not coming in for a workout or a guy not kind of getting the free agent treatment coming to town seemed very, very, very strange and very, very weird. It was just a generally weird weekend. And so every sign that I had, every kind of sense that I got from how the Magic were acting, pointed to Jabari Smith Jr. And that's probably what they wanted us all to think. For whatever reason, whether it was trying to convince a team to trade up and get Paolo, or make another team think that, that they were going to take the guy and they could get the guy that they actually wanted, Paolo Banchero, later in the draft. The Magic really just kind of played their cards very, very close to the vest. They let everyone else kind of fill the narrative. They did their work. And, at the end of the day, you had the #1 pick, you get the guy that you really wanted. And I guess Paolo Banchero was that guy.
Yeah, I mean, from every impression that I got here in Houston, echoing the similar sentiments as your own, is just the Rockets were very much ready for Paolo Banchero at number 3. And then when things broke the way that they did, they're in the fortuitous position of you just get whichever one of the 3 is left. So instead of having your choice at number 1, the way the Magic did, the Rockets just lucked out with Chet Holmgren going number 2 and then Jabari Smith all the way down at number 3. But let's focus here on Paolo Banchero, because Philip, what does getting a guy of Paolo Banchero's caliber mean for the Orlando Magic?
I mean, it means everything. I've been kind of like going through the stats and everything. My kind of least favorite stat, but my most interesting Magic fact that I have like ready in my back pocket is the Orlando Magic have not had a non-center average 20 points per game or more since Steve Francis back in 2005. It's a stat that I trotted out there a lot in arguing for why Paolo Banchero should be the number 1 pick for the Magic, because Orlando just does not have a great history of wing players. And I consider Paolo Banchero to be kind of a modern 4, kind of a wing-based player. They have just not had a lot of guys who can put the ball on the floor and get you a basket in that way. I've kind of been thinking about it. Paolo Banchero might be the best kind of one-on-one basketball player the Magic have had since Tracy McGrady, with all due respect to Steve Francis, since that time. So for nearly 20 years now, since 2005, the Magic traded Steve Francis in 2006. It's been a long time since Orlando has had a dominant scoring presence that wasn't a Dwight Howard, that wasn't a Shaquille O'Neal. Nikola Vucevic, is a certain type of player. They have not had this kind of player in a very, very long time. And, we were talking about this before we started recording. Sometimes you overthink things. Basketball is a very simple game. Can you get the ball in the basket? Can you make a shot? Can you get to the rim? Can you put pressure on the defense that way? That's probably even getting too complicated. Paolo Banchero is a scorer. And I think that's what the Magic ultimately determined that they needed. They needed a guy who could be a primary scorer and could fit and fill that role very, very quickly.
And in some of our previous discussions, you and I have talked about this, the fact that back during the lottery phase of this whole pre-draft process, when we found out Orlando was going to be the number 1 overall selection, so many people were automatically like drafting up Jabari to Orlando. And I was kind of sitting there thinking, well, Paolo to Orlando makes kind of a lot of sense, because at the top of the draft, you have a couple guys who are maybe more so ancillary pieces in Jabari Smith and Chet Holmgren, who are going to fill amazing roles for their respective teams. And then you've got kind of the bucket getters, right, in Paolo Banchero and Jaden Ivey, guys who you put the ball in their hands and they're going to go get you buckets or create offense for their respective teams. And that's exactly the type of guy that the Magic, got their hands on now with that number 1 overall selection, which kind of leads me to this next question here, Philip, is does Paolo just automatically become the number 1 option, the number 1 guy in Orlando, or is there maybe going to be some, fighting over the pecking order, or how do you envision this kind of starting once he eventually hits the floor?
I mean, I think obviously everything is earned. So, I think you could come into any season with an idea of how things are going to be. But Paolo Banchero's got to go out there and prove that he can be that number 1 scoring option. I think obviously you draft Paolo Banchero, and this is what I felt like throughout the draft process. If you believe Paolo Banchero can be your 20 point a game night, 20 point per game night, plus, or whatever, that's the guy you draft. I certainly, as I sat more with the tape, kind of began to doubt that a little bit. And that's maybe why I moved off of him in the pre-draft process. But the Magic clearly believed in him to be able to do that. You draft Paolo Banchero to be your primary scorer. He's the kind of player that puts other players in the right role. I would argue that's been one of the Magic's biggest problems. They've had a lot of really good players over the last decade, whether it's Tobias Harris, whether it's Nikola Vucevic, whether it's, even Evan Fournier, Aaron Gordon, Victor Oladipo. They've had quality talent that they haven't been able to put together. And part of that is because everyone's just kind of playing the wrong role. Guys are being asked to do too much. There's maybe too many mouths to feed with a lot of young players. And I think that'll be an issue for the Magic moving forward. But if Paolo Banchero can establish himself as that primary scorer, as, a pick and roll option with Markelle Fultz, someone who could do a little bit of things off the ball, but be that primary guy, then everyone else's role starts to make a whole lot more sense. And everyone starts to understand, okay, this is where I fit into this team, or this is my role on this team. This is what's going to make our team successful. There's going to be some trial and error. Obviously, this is a young team. There's a lot of guys trying to prove themselves still. But I think that the Magic do envision Paolo Banchero taking on that role and taking it on fairly quickly.
Look, it's going to be probably a few years before we have, a definitive answer to this question I'm about to ask you, Philip. But right now, gut reaction, was taking Paolo Banchero number 1 overall instead of Jabari Smith Jr. the right move at this point in time for this Magic organization?
I think if they believe that he can be a 20-point per game night, a point per game a night guy, if they believe he can be the primary scorer, that they can build an offense around, and not just a good offense, kind of a let's just get straight to it, a championship level offense. He is 100% the right pick. I said this before the draft process, or said this during the draft process. Paolo Banchero's game is the one that screams star to me. Like, he does the things that you expect star players to do. The question I think that followed Paolo around is, can he grow his playmaking, which everyone seems to think that he can, to make others around him better? Can he extend out to 3-point line? Can he add that defensive element to be a two-way player, which they certainly showed signs of, but he also showed plenty of signs that the defensive effort wasn't always there. He would even admit that his attention to detail on defense, especially when he gets tired, kind of went on and off throughout his year at Duke. But if all those elements are there, Paolo Banchero is the most NBA ready, the guy that I think can make the most immediate impact and still grow and get a whole lot better. If he can't reach that level, I think there'll be a lot of questions, because there's a lot of guys in this league who are 20-point per game a night guys, but they don't make their teams better. They don't lead to winning. And so it can't just be about raw numbers. It has to be about winning and building a winning franchise and winning organization. That's obviously a goal that the Magic have.
Was Paolo Banchero the right pick for the Orlando Magic? We're going to find out not so far along in the distant future. We got Vegas Summer League coming up right around the corner, and the very first game of Summer League will be between the Orlando Magic and the Houston Rockets. Paolo Banchero, Jabari Smith Jr. going head-to-head. For that, be sure to follow Philip. He's going to keep you up to date with all of that over at Locked On Magic. Philip, I appreciate you stopping by Locked On NBA with me.
Thanks for having me on, Jackson.